we start counting 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is a day that's commemorated worldwide, promoted largely by the United Nations. UN Women particularly, very, very big on this, right, Ndu? And on Friday, we had a conversation about fighting FGM and the commitments that the government has made, and also what's happening in the country in the fight against FGM. Now, let's talk about the Red Card campaign, implementing policies against gender-based violence. And joining us now in the studio is Dr. Djibril Diallo. He's the president and CEO of the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, Inc., that is ARDN. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
Dr. Diallo.
Thank you very much.
From what nationality? What nationality are you?
My country of origin is Senegal, but my organization is headquartered in New York City.
Right. Tell us about the organization, the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network.
The African Renaissance and Diaspora Network is an international organization which has got the consultative status with the United Nations and recognized by the U.S. government. And it has been mandated to help to popularize the Sustainable Development Goals in Africa and in the diaspora. So ARDN, its name, is present in about 80 countries of Africa and the diaspora.
80 in Africa and the diaspora.
80
Yes.
in Africa and in the diaspora.
There's the campaign, the Red Card campaign. Now introduce us to the Red Card campaign.
Well, you know, for many of your listeners, when you talk about Sustainable Development Goals, when you talk about SDGs, it's like an alphabet soup. So that to the woman and the man of the street, it does not relate to the me. So that we need to find ways in which we can grab the attention of the public in order to deal with issues of major concern. The Declaration of the Human Rights Declaration of 1948 said that all women, all human beings are born equal, born free and dignity. But then 2023 will be the year when you will have the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But until now, women are not enjoying fully their rights. So that the idea of the Red Card campaign came about in order to use the convening powers of sports and culture in order to bridge this gap between women and men. I was very happy that Kenya was one of the, if not the only country that I know of, you know, which has during the New York Marathon, the two winners were from one country. And then when Kenya was celebrating them, it didn't matter which ethnic group a Kenyan belonged to. It didn't matter what the economic status it was. Everybody was behind the two winners. So we want to make sure that we use that convening power in order to give a red card to all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls. Because in the game of football, as you know, when you give the red card to a player, then that player has done a very serious infringement of the rules of football, and the player is thrown off the field.
Right.
For us, the red card means that any kind of violation of society's rules vis-a-vis women and girls. And we're doing it not alone, in partnership with the United Nations, in partnership with FIFA itself, so that we got together organizations that are normally not used to working together to make sure that we say no to all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls.
It was necessary. I mean, just taking the analogy of the red card, because by the time a player on the field is shown a red card, things would appear to have gone bad. You have violated a rule, and according to the referee, they've said, look, we cannot, because of this thing that you have done, we cannot allow you to continue to play.
Exactly.
At least not for some time.
Right.
But for this now that we're looking and using that same analogy, have things gotten to the point whereby such an intervention then, whereby you say, do not play anymore, then needed to be invited?
Violence against women is today a global pandemic. 1 woman out of 3 has indicated that she has experienced sexual or physical violence in her lifetime. And a third of the women have had that kind of experience as well in terms of intimate partner violence. So that it's a pandemic that needs to be addressed. And the idea of the red card is really to try and federate the efforts which are being made, because it's not something that would be like a bushfire kind of effect, come and launch the campaign and then leave. No, try to see what the left hand is doing in order to make sure that the right hand is aware of it. And then when the left hand and the right hand are working together, that makes 2 and 2 become 5 rather than 4 when it comes to fighting violence against women and girls. It's a pandemic. It's so serious. No country in the world treats its women as well as it does its men. That's the United Nations says that. I was, at one point in my life, director of communications of the United Nations Development Program based in New York. And the Human Development Report of UNDP said that no country in the world treats its women as well as it does its men. So we've got to fight the apartheid of gender as forcefully as we fought apartheid in South Africa.
When you say red card, I know it's red card against gender-based violence. Who do you want to issue a red card to? And from what pitch do you want them to get out?
Well, number one, when you have the red card, the idea of the red card is to make sure that countries are really made aware of this global pandemic, and that we make sure also that one important constituency is an ally in this, that is men. We're not saying that all men are committing acts of violence against women. But when you look at violence against women and girls, the great majority of the violence comes from men. So that we need to make sure that men become allies also in this effort. That's why about just over a week ago, I was part of the National Organizing Committee of the Second African Union Conference, hosted by the current chair of the African Union, President Macky Sall of Senegal, on the Summit on Positive Masculinity. So that when we are talking about that, we're not talking not only about heads of state, but how do we plug into the system? In the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, we use a number of entry points. One, we have the youth, the creativity of youth. We need to engage the youth, who are the leaders of today, not the leaders of tomorrow. Secondly, since in Kenya, instead of mayors, you have governors. So we need to engage the go-to person who's the governor in the community. Because with all due respect to the minister is not the first go-to person. The governor is the first go-to person. So that we engage partnerships with the governors of Kenya. And also education. How do we improve the quality of higher education? We've got 100 universities in the United States, which will engage in partnerships with universities across Kenya, as we have done in other countries. And then the final point in terms of entry point is that we need to try harder to project the islands of hope coming from Africa. From where I sit in New York, when I see stories about Kenya, it's not something that will always make me feel jump of joy. Everything goes wrong, but there are many, many islands of hope that together that we can bring out, because nobody wants to give their resources into a bottomless pit. And things are making a difference. And that's why I'm so happy to be with you here to have this conversation.
You know, there are conversations that have been had on this matter of gender-based violence, matters regarding discrimination based on gender, inequalities based on gender. If I were to ask what it is that your unique contribution is, because it is a topic that is dear to many people's hearts, the UN itself even created UN Women. I mean, there are units that focus on this. So what is your unique niche?
Yes. That's a very good and a very important question. We have been the organization which has come in and said, just like when you deal with culture, you know, when you have Kenyan music, I may not speak any of the languages in Kenya, but the music speaks to me at the core of myself. And then the same thing with sport. So we are one of the few, if not the only organization in the sea of everything addressing gender-based violence and discrimination. We're using the convening powers of sport and culture in order to address this issue. Because you need to grab the attention of the public in order to make sure that this moves forward. And what better way of grabbing the attention of the public when during the World Cup, which is being held in Qatar right now, FIFA, the United Nations, are convened by the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network and saying that while we're having this, let us also focus on something which is a violation of human rights against women. And a violation of human rights against women is a violation of human rights against men and everybody else.
Okay. Now, from your perspective, when you set in motion the processes that you hope to achieve, the goals that you have purposed, what would success look like?
First of all, the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network works very closely with a number of organizations on the ground. I arrived here on Friday, and my first meeting was with Nairobi-based civil society organizations, which are plugged into the system. So we had on a Saturday, and I'm most grateful to them, because some of these NGOs have got a hard time even to move around in terms of financial situation and so on. But, you know, we had a lot of them come and tell us, and I was in a listening mood for them to tell us which way we can deal with gender-based violence in Kenya, so that being plugged in the system regarding civil society organizations, consulting, we have a memorandum of understanding with a number of organizations, starting with UN Women, UN Development Program, UNFPA, so that they are on the ground, they're trusted advisors of Kenya and its own people, so that we go by what they also have. And then we pick it up from there. So that it's something which is our purpose, is to use the convening powers of sports and culture in order to strengthen and accelerate the process of addressing gender-based violence in Africa and in the diaspora.
I've always looked at this and said, you know, well, there's a lot here that requires mind, culture shift, whereby there has been the general acceptance of some of these behaviors. Unfortunately, where a lot of the violence takes place is not in the public arena. When a young girl or a woman is abused in whatever level, the glaring eye of the public is not there. The perpetrators of this usually, again, are not in the public. They may not change, but those upcoming could change certain beliefs that they have. How will this be tackled? They're not on the world stage. They're not in the public. How does that change come about?
Let me give you a quick example. For 10 years, I was special assistant to the then executive director of UNICEF. And you had 10,000 African children who were dying every day from preventable causes. So that we started on something which we called a low-hanging fruit, which was to run immunization campaigns that will reach up the level of immunization of the children of Africa. And then we went into more intractable issues such as fighting malnutrition and issues of that nature. So for us, the Red Card campaign is an entry point in order to make sure that special attention is paid to this issue. And once that's done, then we go back to some of the intractable issues that you just mentioned. For instance, we need to go back to the family level to have a sea change, to have a mind change in our own cultures. When some of us who have children, when the children come home, the boys tend to throw their bags and then go out and play games, football and so on, whereas the girls are kept at home in order to help the mother and things like that. We need to have an educational level that can change the mindset. But that is a long-term process that needs to be addressed. I'm not of those who says that violence against women has been with us since the dawn of humanity. therefore you cannot do anything about it. That is not something which is acceptable. But we need to start somewhere in order to accelerate the process and then raise the bar level, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, when it was addressed in 1948, was only a piece of paper. Then we say any country which is below that kind of level should be denounced internationally.
Dr. Diallo, would you say, because you've given us the statistics, 1 in every 3 women globally has gone through some form of sexual or physical abuse, is there awareness that there is abuse? Is there awareness about gender-based violence among men and women across the globe?
There is awareness, but it needs to be increased because it has been exacerbated. Violence against women and girls has been exacerbated recently by 2 factors. The first factor is the impact of COVID-19. When confinement happened, when men were obliged to stay home, in my own country of origin, many of the young men have got to go out in the morning to seek money in order to provide to the family for their daily consumption. And then confinement says you have to stay at home. So you can imagine that COVID-19 exacerbated violence against women and girls. And then secondly, when you have the war in Ukraine, that has exacerbated the price of economic level, so that poverty levels have gone up internationally. So when there is poverty, experience has shown data-wise that there is an increase of violence. So that when you have the combination of COVID-19 and also poverty levels, that has increased it tremendously. So that would be now a matter of seeing how this could be really dealt with, because when women are subjected to violence, then it means not only in terms of physical, but also health-wise, mental health, depression and otherwise, and even low birth rates for their children.
So then, if people are aware of gender-based violence, they know that there is gender-based violence and these are the forms of gender-based violence, and then we still continue perpetrating the gender-based violence, are you then saying that people do it knowingly and willingly?
Well, it's something which is ingrained in society that your listeners would know more about than I would. For instance, it's just male masculinity, the way some boys have been brought up sometimes. Sometimes in certain societies it could be due to excessive use of drugs or alcohol or other means. So there are all sorts of factors. But what we also try to force on is there should be very stiff national legislations. In these 16 days of mobilization, Senegal, and I'm sure that the same thing will be happening in other countries, I'm just giving Senegal because I just flew in from there, from New York, has given an equivalent of an 800 number, which is very unusual, whereby people can call in confidence and be helped in terms of denouncing gender-based violence. So that at the end of the day, what we need to do is to make sure that each and every one of us makes it a matter at our level to denounce and to make sure that our neighbor who's really engaged in violence against women and girls is also brought to the fore. Because it's something that in families tend to keep it hush-hush. Even sometimes when the woman wants to go and complain in front of the police and so on, negotiations are done in such a way that they say, no, just leave it because this will bring shame to the family.
So are you saying that there should be more forceful implementation of policies and legislation against gender-based violence?
The legal system should be reinforced. And that work is being done under the oversight of UN Women, among other organizations.
To what extent? Because like you said, it's happening in communities, in households, right? There are laws. Countries have come up with laws that will deal with one form or the other of gender-based violence. But it clearly is not happening enough. So what more would you like to see happen? Directly, as an organization?
As an organization, we have a collection of data regarding how countries are addressing gender-based violence. And in that connection, we choose a number of countries on which we put a positive spotlight in order to engage others. And that's why Kenya, for instance, in spite of all the challenges that we have been talking about, Kenya is a light, an island of hope in that sense, because there are lots of efforts at the community level that are being made that could be really documented and shared with others, so that at the end of the day, we want to choose 5 or 6 countries that will be the equivalent of champions, Pan-African champions, for addressing gender-based violence. And in that convention, issues become important because important people are seeing to be paying attention to them. So that President Ruto, we hope that when we organize a side event at the margins of the African Union Summit in February next in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, our intention is to make sure that we showcase the example of Kenya as a country that can be really followed in terms of trying to really frontally deal with the issue of violence against women and girls. And in the first quarter of 2023, the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, in consultation with the United Nations, in consultation with the government of Kenya, will launch a national launch of the Red Card campaign here in Kenya. That will be the start of a 12-month of mobilization. Because when you have a launch, the problem is that it should not just be a launch. So that we have a 12-month period whereby we bring in the other partners that I had mentioned. We will bring in mayors that will have sister city relations with governors. We will bring in universities, as I mentioned. We will bring in the youth and so on and so forth. So that during 12 months, you will have the UN, you will have civil society organizations, and you will have government that would have accelerated the process.
Dr. Diallo, you should have come for a bit longer, but thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Djibril Diallo is the president and CEO of the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, Inc., ARDN, based in New York. We've been talking about the Red Card campaign, implementing policies against gender-based violence as we commemorate 16 days of activism against GBV.